My name's Chazz Upton. Thanks for joining me today as we dive into Luke chapter 15 and look at some of the parables of Jesus. When I was in college, my best friend and I, Caleb, we had a lot of weird traditions. We did a lot of goofy things, and we had a lot of fun adventures that were just sort of weird and out there. And one of the weirder things that we consistently did was go to the local gym and play a couple hour sessions of racquetball. You know, racquetball, that really goofy sport where you lock people in a room and you hit a rubber ball against all the walls all over the place. It was the weirdest thing, but we loved playing it. It was such a fun game. We'd pay just a couple bucks, pay for just one big old session of racquetball, and then we would just play for hours, and keep going. And when we were finally tired and just exhausted, we had a cause for celebration. We had just worked our tails off playing racquetball. We had to celebrate. And so what did we do, as most college guys probably do? We went to Taco Bell. Now, I know you're thinking that's disgusting and probably one of the worst ways to recover from a workout, but it was the way we celebrated. And so we would go to Taco Bell and we would eat a horrific amount of food because we were starving and we had to celebrate our great racquetball session. There are a lot of reasons to celebrate in life. Some of them might have a little more weight than that example. But God's truth calls us today to remember that we, as believers, we need to celebrate the salvation of anyone who comes to know Jesus, because that's exactly what Jesus came for. We are called to celebrate the amazing experience of a lost person being found. We are called to celebrate that and to bring those people in, bring the lost in, so that they can experience a loving relationship with their Heavenly Father once again. And so in Luke 15 today, we're going to see just how Jesus does this, just how Jesus uses parables to teach about this exact point. Now, a little bit of context before we get into this. The chapters leading up to chapter 15 are all about Jesus making his way to Jerusalem. We find out in chapter 13 that that's his direction. And on the way, he's teaching, he's preaching, he's hanging out with a bunch of people. But you see, at this point, his ministry has started to become very polarizing. Chapter 13 tells us that there were rumors of Herod wanting Jesus dead. And in chapter 14, the Pharisees have begun to watch Jesus extremely closely, keeping a close eye on what he's doing and saying. Now, along the way, Jesus has spent a lot of time with both the outcasts and with the Pharisees, so he's spending time with everybody. But as chapter 15 begins, he has once again sat down to teach people, and there's a big gathering around him. Now, verses 1 through 2a tell us that tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and teachers of the law were complaining. Now, we'll just stop there really quick because we need to identify who's here. First off, there's tax collectors, which were sort of believed to be the lowest scum of the earth, because not only were they traitors to their Jewish people for working with Rome, but they were also thought of as thieves for stealing from their brethren. Now, Luke, the author of Luke, uses the term sinners as sort of a sarcastic take on what the Pharisees viewed the other people as. The sinners in the Pharisees' eyes were basically anybody who was lower than them, who was unworthy of their presence, who did not follow their law, and therefore was lost and gone because of it. And so as these Pharisees and teachers of the law are watching these people come to Jesus, these sinners, they start to mutter and complain to themselves. And so they say, this man, referring to Jesus, he welcomes sinners and he eats with them, and they're complaining. And Jesus hears these things, and he has enough of it. He decides to tell them, speak to this matter. Verse 3 tells us that he told them this parable. And Jesus begins with two parables back to back here. He's going to respond to this complaint because this complaint is the crux of what is to follow. The fact that Jesus spends time with outcasts and with sinners is what's going to fuel what Jesus responds with. And so Jesus tells two parables back to back, the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. And each of these parables follows a similar storyline. A person loses something special, so a shepherd loses a sheep, a woman loses a coin. Both of them put all their effort into finding what is lost. They got to find their sheep. They got to find their coin. And they do find it. They end up finding what they've lost. And they just become so overwhelmed with joy and excitement that they ask everyone around them to celebrate with them. And then Jesus wraps up with this explanation of this joy. And it's worth noting that both characters have more than what's lost. So they didn't lose everything, they just lost one part of them. So the shepherd, he lost one of his 99 sheep, and the woman lost one of her 10 coins. But what's important to note is the similarity between the verses of them finding what was lost. So verses 5 and 6 tell us this about the shepherd. When he finds his sheep, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders. He goes home with it. He then calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me. I found my lost sheep." And then in verse 9, in the story of the lost coin, the woman, she finds her lost coin. She calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost coin." You see, both stories, both parables, there's a cause for celebration. What has lost has been found, and therefore they are celebrating. They are calling people to celebrate with them for finding what was lost. But what's interesting is we never actually know what happens. We always just assume what happens, that people will come over and celebrate with them, and it's a big party. But we don't actually know that. And that's important. Jesus does that on purpose. Because first, Jesus needs to drive home a point about sinners. He's driving home a point that lost sinners are exactly the ones in need of being found. Those in our lives who don't have a relationship with God, who don't know who Jesus is, those are the ones that need to be found. They need to be found. They are the lost. But he has more to say than just that, because it's not just about lost being found. It's about the celebration. And so Jesus continues on with that because the Pharisees are failing to grasp the need of the cause for celebration in the lives of these lost people being found. They don't understand that. And so Jesus has laid the trap. He's baited the hook and everything, and he's going to pull it in with this last parable, the parable of the prodigal son. And so this parable goes like this. Jesus continues. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So his dad divides up his property, and the boy takes it and runs. So the boy is clearly just disrespecting his father, taking what doesn't belong to him and running off. And sure enough, in no short amount of time, he loses everything. He squanders it all. And not only does he squander it all and have nothing left, but then a famine strikes, and he has nothing to buy food with, and he's starving. And so he has to hire himself out as a pig feeder. Now, after a certain amount of time of this misery, he realizes, what am I doing? My father's servants live better than I am. And so he hatches this plan, verses 18 through 20. The boy says, "I will set out and go to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son, so please make me like one of your hired servants.' And so with this phrase ringing in his head, he goes back home. And now at this point, you can picture the Pharisees going, good riddance. He's going home. He's going to get what he deserves. But Jesus has a different plan in mind. Because you can picture as the boy is returning home and he's repeating this phrase over and over and over again, I got to say the right thing in the right way. His father sees him. And his father rushes out to him and he embraces this disgusting, smelly boy and kisses his gross hair. And the boy tries to get out this rehearsed speech, but the dad doesn't even hear for it. He calls for a celebration instead. Verse 24, he says, "This son of mine was dead and is alive again. He's lost and has been found." And so everyone begins to celebrate. But unlike the first 2 parables, there's more to it than that. Because the Pharisees, I'm sure, did not like this. The boy didn't get what he deserved. Why would they celebrate a sinner with such a horrible lifestyle? And so Jesus continues the parable by talking about the presence of the older brother. Because the older brother's like, what's going on? Why are we celebrating? And his buddy tells him, hey, your younger brother is back, so we're celebrating. And so the older brother gets very upset and goes to his father, or his father comes to him and he tells his dad, listen, Dad, I'm always here. I'm never disobeying you. But why am I never celebrated? So the parable ends with the father's reminder to his son. In verses 31 and 32, he says, "My son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead, but he's alive again. He was lost and is found." And so Jesus sums up these parables because the whole point of the parables was never entirely about the lost being found. That's a huge part of it, but that's not the crux. It's about celebrating those who do come to know us, or come to know Jesus, those who are lost and have become found. Not only does God welcome everybody who's lost, regardless of who they are, but then he commands his family of believers to welcome them in, to bring them in, and to celebrate them, to celebrate their salvation, to be glad and joyful. And so here's what we need to land on as a family of believers. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Those are the exact people he came to save. His primary goal was to save those who wandered away. And we have to remember that anyone who wanders away is lost. Doesn't matter who they are, they're lost. But anyone who's lost needs to be found. And anyone who's found, that's a cause for celebration. And as us, as formerly lost people, we can attest to how wonderful it is to be found. We as believers who were once lost know exactly what it's like to be found and the joy that comes with that. And so our job is to look at the people in our life who are lost, to look at the sinners that we look down on, and to bring them in, to welcome them in. And when they come to Jesus, when they have that moment where they are reconciled with Jesus, we need to celebrate with them. We need to get excited for them. We need to be motivated as formerly lost people who have become found. We need to be motivated to seek those people out who are lost, to bring them to a place where they can be found again, and to celebrate the joy of them becoming found in Jesus. Because it's super easy for us to ignore the sinners and look down on the sinners. But let me encourage you, don't be like the Pharisees. Don't be like the Pharisees who looked down on these sinners. Rather, we should be seeking them out. We should be bringing them in, looking for them, and welcoming them into Jesus' loving arms. Because that is a cause for celebration.